Hi, what I have behind me here today is a 1999 Mustang V6 2-valve 3.8 liter that I now like to refer to as Project Nightmare. Every time an attempt is made to fix something on this vehicle, it just reveals more problems with it. For this video, I plan on pulling the heads, cleaning up the valves, and then putting it back in. But before I get started, let me give you a little background on the vehicle so you know as to why I'm doing this, where I'm coming from, and where I'm going to. This vehicle was acquired roughly 2 months before making this video. On the day that I went to pick up the rig, I was told that it had a bad fuel pump. And so when I went to pick the vehicle up, I took a battery to make sure that the engine would turn over, and a can of starting fluid, because if it was just a fuel pump or fuel delivery issue, we should be able to crank the motor and squirt it with some starting fluid and it should start. So I did that and it did start. It didn't run very well, but it was enough to convince me that, okay, yeah, it definitely is just a fuel delivery problem. Well, it turned out to be everything but the fuel pump. I got it back to the house and then applied 12 volts to the fuel pump, and it ran. So the next logical step was to start looking at the electrical system that supplies the fuel pump with its power, and started with the fuse. The fuse was good. Checked the relays. The relay was good, and from the relay it goes to what they call a fuel pump driver module, and it was even getting power. However, power was coming into the module, but it wasn't leaving the module, leaving the fuel pump start for power. So that turned out to be the issue, and I thought, well, that's actually better, because it's much easier to replace the fuel pump driver module than it is to drop the gas tank and then replace the fuel pump itself. So anyway, we addressed that issue, and then got a new battery for it, and I thought, okay, great, we'll start it up and everything will be great. Well, it did start, it did run, but it ran very poorly. It made quite a bit of noise, and it also ran with what felt like a misfire. The horrible noise that it made was a result of two different problems. We had some bad pulleys with some bearings that were starting to go, so it made a horrible squeaky noise. And then also we had a crack in the exhaust header, so that made it pretty loud too. So anyway, we had those two problems, along with the fact that it just was not running very well. So after learning those issues, went ahead and did the next few logical things and revisited the spark and fuel delivery, which all seemed fine. So went ahead and did a compression test, and that's when we found some issues. We had very low compression in pretty much all the cylinders. There was two cylinders, number 2 and number 5, which were only at 30 psi, and the best cylinder was only at 75 psi. So we figured, okay, we definitely have something mechanically wrong with the motor, and we're going to need to tear it down. So anyway, once the heads were off, it revealed some more issues with the motor. First of all, we had bad head gaskets, warped heads, and damaged piston and ring, and a little bit of scoring on the cylinder wall. And that would have been cylinder number 2. This is the piston out of it. And I'm not exactly sure what caused this, but I don't know if you can see it here, but there's definitely a lot of scoring here on the side. And the piston rings kind of welded themselves to the pistons, and obviously that made a terrible seal, and that probably explains the low compression in that piston. But anyway, it was shot, so that needed to be replaced. However, the connecting rod seemed to be in great shape, but ended up just replacing the whole thing anyway. The heads, they were definitely warped. Those went to the machine shop, and they shaved about 12 thousandths off the heads. The valves got all cleaned up. They looked to be in good shape as well. The block itself, being iron, was actually in pretty good shape. There was no warpage or anything where the heads meet up on the block. So anyway, I felt at this point we have it figured out. You know, bad heads, bad gasket, and bad piston. So I figured, okay, great, let's get some new head bolts and some new gaskets, a gasket kit, and let's put it back together. And so that's exactly what I did. And once it was all together, went ahead to fire it up, and it ran, but it did not run very well. Again, it felt like it was misfiring, and the noise was much quieter since we'd replaced the headers on it and also the back pulleys, but it still was not running very well. And so I went ahead and did another compression test on it, and lo and behold, low compression. So anyway, the big mistake that I made was failing to check the seals where the valves meet up against the valve seats, because after doing a leak down test, it revealed that we still had an issue with the valve sealing, and there was significant leakage past the intake valves. I didn't check the exhaust valves, but my assumption is probably the same thing going on there. But regardless, at this point, it needs to be pulled and replaced and fixed. So when I have the heads off this time, my intention is to get some valve grinding compound and do some valve lapping and try to make them seal really well. I will test the leakage before I do anything to the valves, just kind of get a baseline. Then I'll try cleaning them up and then test again and make a comparison. Hopefully that'll take care of it. If not, it looks like the heads are probably going to go back to the machine shop and have them probably put in some new valve seats. At this point, you have a good idea of where I'm coming from and where I'm going to. So let's begin this journey and get to work. Well, before we get started on engine teardown, I just kind of wanted to do one last quick little check and see if our suspicions are correct. I'd like to pull the plug wires for each of the cylinders and then observe how the engine runs. Our suspicions at this point are that the cylinders 2 and 5 are not going to contribute much to the way that it's running, and so we should see the least impact on how the motor runs when we pull these 2 wires. When we pull the others, we should see more significant impact on how the engine performs. Okay, as we pull each of these, we should see more significant impact on how the motor runs for the cylinders that are contributing the most. So we'll start here with number 4. Runs a little rougher there. I don't know how obvious that is on camera. There's number 6. Definitely runs rough there. There's number 5. Let's go down to number 2. No difference there. And number 3. A little bit. And let's do number 1 here. Big impact there, and I believe that's the one that had the most compression. Well, that's about all the time I have for today. I'll begin the engine teardown tomorrow. So till then, I'll see you on the next video.